powerful venture capitalist named Richard Chen dismisses Maya Rodriguez, a young entrepreneur, during a pitch meeting, mocking her lack of experience and suggesting she come back when she's ready. But when Richard discovers who Maya really is, it's too late to save his career. What makes Richard face the consequences of his arrogance? Before we get into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Richard Chen stood in the glass-walled conference room of Chen Capital Partners, surveying the San Francisco skyline with the same calculating gaze he had perfected over 2 decades in venture capital. The firm was more than just an investment company. It was a symbol of Richard's dominance in the tech world. Nestled in the heart of the financial district, Chen Capital was known for its aggressive deal-making, its portfolio of billion-dollar exits, and an atmosphere that radiated power and exclusivity. Richard had built the firm's reputation from nothing, turning a small seed fund into a $3 billion empire. Now, everyone from scrappy startups to established unicorns competed for his attention, desperate for the validation that came with a Chen Capital investment. To Richard, maintaining the firm's elite status was everything. Every pitch meeting mattered, every investment decision was calculated, and every entrepreneur was scrutinized not just for their business model, but for whether they fit the mold of what Richard believed a successful founder should be. Richard himself was a man who commanded attention. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair swept back in a deliberate style, he wore custom Armani suits and Swiss watches that cost more than most people's annual salaries. His features were sharp, his posture impeccable, and his demeanor radiated controlled authority. His success was undeniable. Forbes profiles, TechCrunch covers, keynote speeches at elite conferences, Richard had achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. He was proud of his track record, and even prouder of his ability to spot winners and dismiss losers within the first 5 minutes of a pitch. However, beneath that polished exterior lay a man who held rigid beliefs about who could succeed in Silicon Valley. Though Richard would never admit to bias, those who worked closely with him recognized the pattern. Young founders, particularly women and minorities, faced a higher bar in his pitch meetings. He justified it as pattern recognition and industry experience, but the effect was the same: dismissal before they'd barely begun. That Tuesday morning, as Richard prepared for his 10 a.m. pitch meeting, he had no idea his world was about to change. At exactly 10 a.m., Richard's assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Chen, your 10 o'clock is here. Maya Rodriguez from Catalyst AI." Richard glanced at his calendar. Catalyst AI, some machine learning startup in the healthcare space. He'd agreed to the meeting as a favor to someone, though he couldn't recall who. 20 minutes, he'd decided, just long enough to be polite before moving on to more promising opportunities. The door opened and Maya Rodriguez walked in. She was young, mid-20s at most, with dark hair pulled into a professional ponytail and a navy blazer that looked carefully chosen. She carried a laptop bag and wore minimal jewelry. Her outfit was appropriate for the meeting, tasteful even, but Richard's mind was already making calculations. Too young, probably fresh out of some accelerator program, likely technical background but no real business experience. "Ms. Rodriguez," Richard said, his tone smooth and practiced. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Chen," Maya replied, her voice clear and confident. "I've been following Chen Capital's healthcare portfolio for years. Your investment thesis aligns perfectly with what we're building." Richard nodded but checked his phone briefly, a subtle signal that his attention was divided. "Tell me about Catalyst AI." Maya opened her laptop and launched into her pitch. "We've developed an AI platform that predicts patient deterioration in hospital settings 72 hours before traditional monitoring systems. Our algorithm has a 94% accuracy rate, and we're already piloting in 3 major hospital systems. She pulled up slides showing impressive metrics: revenue growth, retention rates, clinical outcomes. The technology was genuinely innovative, the market opportunity massive, and the early traction undeniable. But Richard barely looked at the screen. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, wearing an expression that Maya had seen before: polite condescension. "The healthcare AI space is extremely crowded," Richard said, interrupting her mid-sentence. "What makes you think a team of, 20-something Stanford grads can compete with established players who have decades of relationships in this industry?" Maya didn't flinch. "Because we're solving a different problem. The established players focus on diagnostics. We focus on prediction and prevention. It's a blue ocean opportunity." Richard smiled thinly. "Ms. Rodriguez, I've been in this business for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of pitches from bright young founders who believe they've found some magical gap in the market. The reality is that enterprise healthcare requires relationships, regulatory expertise, and frankly, gray hair. No offense, but you look like you graduated last year." "I graduated 4 years ago," Maya said calmly. "And our advisory board includes the former Surgeon General and the CTO of Kaiser Permanente." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Advisory boards are window dressing. What investors care about is execution capability. And if I'm being honest, and I'm always honest in these meetings, I don't see the team maturity here that would make me comfortable writing a check." He glanced at his watch. "Look, you seem smart. The technology might have potential. My advice? Spend another 2 years building traction, bring on a seasoned CEO with real healthcare experience, and then come back. Right now, this feels like an idea, not an investment opportunity." Maya's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Chen, we're not looking for advice. We're raising a Series A at a $45 million valuation. We have term sheets from 3 other firms. I came here because Chen Capital claims to back transformative healthcare companies. If you're not interested, that's fine. But don't pretend this is about team maturity. We both know what this is really about." Richard's expression hardened. "And what exactly is this about, Ms. Rodriguez?" "Pattern recognition," Maya said quietly. "You've convinced yourself that successful founders look a certain way, act a certain way, come from a certain background, and when someone walks in who doesn't fit your pattern, you find reasons to say no before you've even looked at the data." For a moment, silence hung in the room. Then Richard stood up. "I think we're done here. I appreciate you coming in, but Chen Capital won't be participating in your round. I wish you the best of luck with your other investors." Maya closed her laptop slowly and stood. She looked Richard directly in the eye. "You know what's interesting, Mr. Chen? The people who are most confident in their pattern recognition are usually the ones most blind to their own biases. I hope you remember this conversation." She walked to the door, paused, and turned back. "People always reveal who they really are when they think there are no consequences. Thank you for showing me exactly who you are." And with that, Maya Rodriguez walked out of Chen Capital Partners. Richard returned to his desk, already dismissing the meeting from his mind. Just another entitled young founder who couldn't handle honest feedback. He'd seen dozens of them. By lunchtime, he'd completely forgotten about Maya Rodriguez and Catalyst AI. That would prove to be his most expensive mistake. 3 weeks later, Richard received an email that changed everything. The subject line was simple: "Urgent, regarding Chen Capital Governance." It came from Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in San Francisco, representing high net worth clients and major institutional investors. "Dear Mr. Chen, we are writing on behalf of a client who holds significant limited partner interest in Chen Capital Partners. Our client has requested an emergency board meeting to discuss matters of firm governance and strategic direction. Per the terms of your partnership agreement, this meeting is mandatory and will take place Friday at 2 p.m. at our offices. Your presence is required. Due to the sensitive nature of these discussions, our client has requested confidentiality until the meeting. Sincerely, David Morrison, Esquire. Richard read the email twice, his stomach tightening. An emergency board meeting called by an LP? That was highly unusual. Chen Capital had 30 limited partners, wealthy individuals and institutions who had invested in the fund. Richard maintained good relationships with all of them, or so he thought. He immediately called his COO, James Park. James, did you know anything about this board meeting? Just got the same email, James replied, sounding equally confused. I've been going through the LP list trying to figure out who could have requested this. None of our major investors have complained about performance. We're up 18% this year. Morrison and Associates, Richard muttered. That's the firm that represents the Rodriguez family. The Rodriguez family? James asked. Miguel Rodriguez, real estate empire. Private equity, one of the wealthiest families in California. But they're not one of our LPs, are they? There was a pause on the line. Actually, Richard, I'm looking at the cap table now. Rodriguez Family Office became an LP 2 years ago. They're our second largest investor, 22% of the fund. Richard felt ice in his veins. 22%? How did I not know this? They invested through a holding company. It's listed as RFO Holdings, LLC. I never connected it to Miguel Rodriguez. Richard's mind raced. Why would the Rodriguez family office call an emergency meeting? They'd been silent partners, never attending quarterly calls or asking questions. What had changed? The next 3 days passed in a fog of anxiety and speculation. Richard tried to reach out to other board members, but they were equally in the dark. Whatever this was about, it was being orchestrated carefully and quietly. Friday arrived faster than Richard wanted. At 1:55 p.m., Richard entered the sleek conference room at Morrison and Associates. The firm's offices occupied the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. Richard arrived early, as always, and took a moment to compose himself. He had prepared talking points, financial projections, anything that might be needed to address investor concerns. The door opened at exactly 2 p.m. Richard turned, expecting to see David Morrison or perhaps one of the senior partners from the Rodriguez family office. Instead, walking through the door in a perfectly tailored gray suit was Maya Rodriguez. Behind her came an older man Richard recognized from Forbes covers, Miguel Rodriguez himself, along with a team of lawyers and financial advisors. For a moment, Richard's brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Maya Rodriguez, the same young woman he'd dismissed 3 weeks ago. Here, at an emergency board meeting for his firm. Mr. Chen, Maya said, her voice calm and professional. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Richard remained standing, his composure cracking. Ms. Rodriguez, I don't understand. What are you doing here? Miguel Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Mr. Chen, I'm Miguel Rodriguez. My family office is your second largest limited partner. Maya is my daughter and the managing director of our technology investment portfolio. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Maya pulled out a chair at the head of the conference table. Shall we begin? Richard sat down mechanically, his mind reeling. Maya was Miguel Rodriguez's daughter. The Rodriguez family office, 22% of his fund. How had he not made the connection? Maya opened a leather portfolio and began. Mr. Chen, my family has been a limited partner in Chen Capital for 2 years. During that time, we've been conducting a comprehensive evaluation of the firm's investment strategy, performance metrics, and operational integrity. She slid a document across the table. 3 weeks ago, I visited your offices under the name Maya Rodriguez, my legal name, to pitch my company, Catalyst AI. That pitch was not what it appeared to be. Richard's face went pale. It was a test. It was due diligence, Maya corrected. We wanted to understand how Chen Capital evaluates opportunities, particularly opportunities presented by founders who don't fit traditional Silicon Valley demographics. What we found was concerning. Miguel Rodriguez spoke next. Mr. Chen, my family has built our wealth over 3 generations. We've succeeded because we recognize talent and opportunity wherever it appears, not just in familiar packages. Based on Maya's experience and our broader investigation, we believe Chen Capital's leadership has become a liability. That's absurd, Richard said, finding his voice. Chen Capital has delivered consistent returns. Returns that could be significantly higher, Maya interrupted, if the firm wasn't systematically overlooking high-potential investments due to the managing partner's unconscious biases. Over the past 6 months, I've reviewed every pitch meeting you personally conducted. 73% of female founders received funding, 4%. The pattern is undeniable. She pulled out another document. More importantly, 3 companies you personally passed on, companies where the founders were young, female, or non-white, went on to raise at 9-figure valuations within 18 months. That's not just bias, Mr. Chen. That's leaving money on the table. Richard felt the room closing in. What exactly are you proposing? Miguel leaned forward. We're proposing a restructuring. Effective immediately, Chen Capital will operate under new leadership. You will step down as managing partner. That's impossible, Richard said, his voice rising. I founded this firm. I have board control. You have majority board control as long as you maintain more than 60% LP support, Maya said calmly. We've spoken with your other limited partners. Between our 22% and the partners we've secured commitments from, we now control 67% of LP votes. Per your partnership agreement, that gives us the authority to remove you from operational control. Richard stared at her in disbelief. This is a hostile takeover. This is business, Miguel said, and it comes with an offer. We're prepared to buy out your equity stake in Chen Capital for $240 million, well above market value. You'll walk away wealthy and can start a new fund if you choose, but you will no longer run this one. And if I refuse? Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. Maya's expression didn't change. If you refuse, we'll proceed with the restructuring anyway. We'll install new management, and you'll be removed with cause, which means forfeiting your unvested carry and facing a public explanation of why. Your reputation in the industry will be permanently damaged. The choice is yours, but I'd strongly advise taking the deal. For several long moments, Richard said nothing. He looked at the documents in front of him, at the lawyers flanking Maya and Miguel, at the faces of his own board members who had remained conspicuously silent. You planned this, he said quietly. From the moment you walked into my office, this was the plan. No, Maya replied. When I walked into your office, I was genuinely considering whether Chen Capital might be a good fit for Catalyst AI's Series A. Your behavior in that meeting made the decision for me. This, she gestured at the conference room, is simply good governance. Richard felt a mixture of emotions, rage, humiliation, disbelief, but underneath it all was the cold realization that he had no leverage. They had outmaneuvered him completely. I need time to think, he said. You have until Monday at 5 p.m., Miguel said, standing. After that, the offer expires and we proceed without your cooperation. I suggest you consult with your attorney. The meeting ended. Richard left the building in a daze, the late afternoon sun feeling harsh and unforgiving. Over the weekend, Richard barely slept. He consulted lawyers who confirmed what he already knew. The partnership agreement was airtight. The Rodriguez family and their coalition had the votes. He could fight, but he would lose, and losing would be far more expensive than accepting the buyout. On Monday at 4:47 p.m., Richard signed the documents. Chen Capital Partners would continue without him. The firm he had built, the empire he had created, it all belonged to someone else now. And the architect of his downfall was a 26-year-old woman he had dismissed as inexperienced 3 weeks earlier. The announcement hit the tech press within hours. Breaking. Richard Chen steps down from Chen Capital in surprise restructuring. The official statement was vague, citing strategic differences and new leadership direction, but the tech community immediately began speculating. Within days, the real story leaked. A TechCrunch article titled, "How Maya Rodriguez Orchestrated Silicon Valley's Quietest Coup," detailed the full saga, the test pitch, the LP coalition, the forced buyout. The piece included data on Chen Capital's historical funding patterns and quoted anonymous sources describing Richard's dismissive treatment of diverse founders. The reaction was swift and unforgiving. Former founders who had pitched Richard came forward with their own stories of condescension and bias. Portfolio company CEOs quietly distanced themselves. Conference organizers rescinded speaking invitations. Richard's network, the same network that had celebrated him for decades, began to evaporate. The industry that had lionized him as a kingmaker now viewed him as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, under Maya's leadership, Chen Capital underwent a transformation. The firm implemented blind pitch reviews, diversified its partnership, and launched an initiative specifically focused on overlooked founders. Within 6 months, the fund's performance actually improved. Turns out, expanding the pattern recognition led to better returns. The tech press celebrated the turnaround. Maya Rodriguez appeared on magazine covers. Chen Capital became the firm everyone wanted to work with. Richard watched it all from the sidelines. The $240 million buyout was substantial, but it didn't ease the deeper loss. His identity had been wrapped up in Chen Capital. Without it, he felt adrift. He tried starting a new fund, but limited partners were hesitant. The story of his downfall had spread too far. The same investors who once competed for allocation in his funds now returned his calls out of courtesy, not interest. The isolation was profound. Richard spent his days in his Pacific Heights mansion, scrolling through news about Chen Capital's continued success, each article a reminder of what he'd lost, industry's premier annual event. He told himself it was about networking, about showing he was still relevant, but deep down he knew he was chasing the feeling of belonging he'd lost. He registered online, paying the $3,000 attendance fee, and showed up on opening day. At the registration desk, he gave his name to the young woman checking badges. "Richard Chen," she said, scanning her tablet. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see your registration in our system." Richard frowned. "I registered 3 weeks ago. Can you check again?" The woman scrolled through her screen. "I see a registration under that name, but it was flagged and removed. There's a note here that says..." She paused, uncomfortable. "Says what?" Richard asked, though dread was already building. "It says that due to code of conduct concerns related to previous professional behavior, your registration was declined with a full refund. I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the attendee list." Richard stood there, frozen, as other attendees streamed past him into the conference hall. Through the glass doors, he could see the opening keynote beginning. On the massive screen at the front of the auditorium, Maya Rodriguez stood at the podium, about to speak to 3,000 of the industry's most influential people. The irony was complete. He had dismissed her from his office, and now he was the one being turned away at the door. Richard turned and walked out of the building, into the San Francisco morning, knowing that the empire he had built was gone, and the world had moved on without him. Do you think Maya's approach was justified, or did she go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What we learn from this story is that the way you treat people when you think they have no power over you reveals your true character. And in a world where everyone is connected and fortunes can shift overnight, today's dismissed stranger could become tomorrow's judge of your fate. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put in a lot of time and effort crafting these narratives about power, consequence, and justice in the business world. Your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey.